Okay, it looks like I can start. So, hi, my name is Ali. I am Irish and I'm currently living in Germany and working as a senior Java developer here in Germany. So my presentation today is going to be on Java development. It's easy when you know how. So I'm going to go through a quick run through of my career and what has happened and some tips and tricks along the way. So, my own background then, I suffered greatly with imposter syndrome when I started in university. I went from an all-girls school with all sisters to an all-male environment. It was a bit of a culture shock. I started with information technology honours degree at NUI Galway in Ireland. And my first day was look to the person on your left and look to the person on your right. Only one of you will graduate, and that actually was true. There was a lot of someone has made a mistake, you're not meant to be here, we're going to tap you on the shoulder and you're going to need to leave along the way, but we'll come to that in a second. So I'm going to go really quickly through my history and then talk a little bit about how the tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. So I started in 2002. That was the start of my programming education as well. There was a heavy component of programming and mathematics involved and physics as well. And that usually they were the three subjects that people were weaned out of at the start of the program. I finished that in 2006. And in 2007, I decided that I needed to do a master's because I just felt like I wasn't confident enough with my programming ability after 4 years of training, and I had already worked as a software tester. That was a little bit, the environment was a little bit challenging, and I thought, okay, if I can just improve my skills, then I will have that as like my barrier against people. But for creative minds to be active, the basic need is to feel safe and in an environment that's really important. So continuing on then 2009, I had finished my master's and I had worked as well, and I kind of realized that we were socialized differently. So every interaction that I had with people in work was very competitive. We communicate differently, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on as well. And the competitive nature of males when I started college was still there, was still a trend throughout. I thought I'd left that behind. So when I started college at 17, that was 17-year-olds, you're still teenagers, and you think it's kind of going to go after that. But cut to 2015, I had finished a PhD, I got a scholarship, and I made it. I loved it. I was surrounded by supportive, encouraging, positive people that really wanted to see me succeed. I finished it in a really short space of time, and I learned so much along the way, including how to learn correctly, how to encourage myself to learn, and everything along the way. So cut to now, and it's patience, take a breath and repeat. Yes, I can figure this out. It took me a long time to get there, but I got there in the end. So a thought experiment, and this is the most important part. So memory wise, the really important part when you're learning, and I've really noticed that I had a fixed mindset, and that was really inhibiting my ability to learn more and grow within my role. And one of the major parts is adopting a growth mindset. So you focus on your journey, you focus on the process, you set things like your initiation habits, so you lay out your things before you. So at the moment I'm doing a 28-day challenge for fitness, and if I do not have my mat out that morning, then I will not do it. So preparation is key. The 5-minute trick is very useful as well. So when you're starting to learn, if you have 5 minutes aside that you can basically you can think about, and you can say, okay, I'll do this within 5 minutes, and then if I only dedicate 5 minutes to it, then at least I've got 5 minutes done that day. And you do that every single day, and usually 5 minutes turns into a little bit longer. The Pomodoro technique is a 25-minute timer that you set, and within that 25 minutes you concentrate fully on the task at hand. I set them for 20 minutes and then I take a 5-minute break. The 5-minute break can be doing something else like administrative stuff or checking emails or something else, but it gives your brain a break. And when you come back to it, usually you can program better. So it allows you to do that. There's also a Freedom app, which is basically cuts off your internet. So when you cut off your internet, be really careful that you have dedicated resources available, because I've done it before where I've shut down everything and you cannot get it back again. So you have to wait for the time to finish. Procrastination is a big one as well. So procrastination is not being lazy, it's actually feeling bad, being associated with feeling bad doing something. So you procrastinate because it's quite hard to start it or to get into it or to start learning something. So again, the growth mindset really helps with this, because you focus on, if I can do 5 minutes, and if I can document it, and if I focus on the process and enjoy the process and get excited about learning, then it really helps. A pen and paper for later is always really important. So when you set your 20 minutes, you literally stop at 20 minutes for your Pomodoro method and you write down whatever you're going to come back to. That helps you pick up again. That's the same as when you're in work and you want to solve a problem and you can't let go of the problem in your head that evening. I have woken up at 5 a.m. to do some tasks and found a solution in my mind at 5 a.m. and that's also not healthy. So it's really important to have a pen and paper to write down what you think, and then just let it go and then come back to it again with a fresh mind. Notepad++ and Git to keep your versioning is always really important. Notepad++ for useful parts of your development as well. And also keep a progress journal. Today I learned, and you write it down. That's really, really important. Also engaging with community. So engaging with Programming for Beginners Facebook groups or Twitter. Twitter is really useful for people posting up different things. Facebook groups, be a little bit careful. There are people that say, go read a book, and there are people that are really encouraging. Just find your encouraging people. And obviously I created a YouTube channel, so there's that as well, but there are other YouTube channels available as well. So when it comes to Java itself, read from right to left. That is one of the most important things. So if you take the first string, hello equals hello world. So if I take my hello world and write it on a piece of paper like this, I have a box in memory that only stores strings. So it's a certain length and a certain amount of space in my memory, and it stores strings, and I've called it hello. So if you think of it like that, everything is a box physically, then you can kind of get your mind around some of the concepts within programming as well. Everything is based in a real world, so everything you can translate to real world concepts. That is one idea. There is everything is to do with linking, and if you can use syntax within general terms and print out everything, it also really helps. So if you're a developer and you're trying to figure out someone else's code, usually printing out everything and taking logs so you can trace through your code along the way is the most important thing you can do. Also experimenting in different environments. At home, I've got a MacBook. I also have a partition with Ubuntu. In work, I have Windows. And then within different environments, sometimes the environment variables interact differently. But think of everything with programming, you think of it as linking. So you link everything together. So what you call, you have to, whatever name you call it, you have to also use it in the next name as well. So for instance, if you look at it in general terms, so I've got object, obj. So if we read the other way again, so object, we're creating a new one and we're calling it obj, and its type object. Also with general things like class name dot method, that would obviously be a static class. Static you can think of as a shared object as opposed to think of it in other terms. So for instance, if you're in a computer game and you're looking at game development and you have bullets to be shared across a team, so then you would have a static bullets variable, and that would be shared then across the team. So you'd only have one of it. That's basically what static means. So if you think of it in analogies, it helps a lot with programming. That goes the same with class name, class local name is equals to new class name. So we're assigning a new class to the class local name, and the same with class local name dot method. So when you learn a language, the biggest hurdle is that practice. So when you learn an actual human language, you usually have people that reply, but with programming, you don't have anyone that replies. So you need to be able to understand the errors that are involved. And understanding those errors really, really helps significantly. So if we take as well an example of object-oriented programming like encapsulation. Encapsulation basically means that we're going to set private variables. We do not want to adjust an object, and we are going to access it through different ways. So firstly, though, we're also going to talk about words in programming. So what do I mean by a constructor? We're going to construct an object. You can look up the definition of constructor. It just means we're going to build an object. What's an object? What's a class? So let's think of a class as a blueprint. Everyone knows, everyone has heard a class as a blueprint, but let's talk about houses. So when you build a house, when you construct a house, you have blueprints. An architect has blueprints all laid out for a 3-bedroom house or a 4-bedroom house. Is it semi-detached? Is it detached? Is it how many bathrooms does it have? Everything like that within it. So they are all of your different elements within it. So if you think of then one class as an object, and one house is an object, and we are going to adjust that object locally. So we're going to make an instance of it. So an instance meaning we're going to make a copy of it. So some of the language that is used within programming, we also need to think of it in real life. Some of the programming languages to explain things we do not use in real life. So for instance, here we have our class name called class name, our class called class name with a capital letter. And then we have 3 private variables that we're going to, basically anytime that I call a class or make a new object, I'm going to call it local class name 1. If you look at the bottom of the screen, it's in yellow. And I'm going to create a new object, and I'm going to say that the int customer number is 453-345, and the name is Ali1. So with every class that you make, there's a default constructor. So we don't need to do that. So a default constructor is always the name of the class, just with public in front of it. So anytime I construct something, then I'd use a constructor, obviously. So within Java, there's default constructors, and within that we can also adjust them as well. So this is just a simple example of how you would make a new one, but each time you make a new one, you can change different things. And when you change different things, you can get methods and also set methods. So with a method, you can think of it like a verb within English. So it has to do something. Then you can also think of a method stack as a stack of plates. So we're always going to think of a stack of plates in everything to do with in real life. So you push it on. So you have your task in the plate, you push it on, and you pop it off. And that's your last in, first out stacks. And that's how you basically get around all of the complicated language that is in programming. That's a really brief example, but your role then within an organization, and how to get into more senior role if you're a developer, and how to stick with programming, because I find it very difficult in certain environments, and the competitive nature of communication styles versus the cooperative nature. And that is an inherent thing. And I refer back to some of the talks that were held yesterday that were really useful to do with gender issues. I've come across it a lot. So we communicate differently, we're socialized differently, there's certain levels of expectations that are different, and if we navigate our way through it. So women usually reach out to each other for connection, and men are more looking for the competitive nature, and just observe that, and you can see in society it's kind of prevalent. I'm not saying everyone does it. I'm not saying it's a global thing, but certainly in my cases, and it's proven that the previous presentations that I saw yesterday were also similar. So you can read that later, but I would highly recommend reading Do Not Be the Glue, Tanya Riley's presentation on SlideShare. It's really useful. And lastly, then I'm going to leave some time for questions. So I ran through that really quickly so that you can have Thanks for questions. I have my website there if you want to read any of my own personal experiences as well, and obviously a YouTube channel. And thank you so much for watching. Feel free to reach out and ask any questions, and most importantly, have fun learning how to code in Java. So if you always use the analogies, it's really, really useful. So I'm going to stop sharing now and then go back to the chat so you can ask me any questions that you want. Is not the language, it's getting from design model to code. There are do's and don'ts to remember. That's true. So the design model is also really important. And when you're, especially when you're moving organizations, you have to also take into consideration any of the way they do code. Certain places that I've worked in, they don't have any code style. But if you think of it like if you're writing a document and you have templates, so you have, for instance, in Word, particular headers and particular columns of the way you want to see things, and code is exactly the same. So I would say the biggest hurdle might be going to patterns. Like, so for instance, the model view presenter, you have to kind of look at some of the examples that are available online, reach out to the community, and also practice those time and time again, because with every language, including a human language, we have to make sure that we practice. And once you get out of practicing, it's quite hard to get back into it as well. The theory is quite okay, but to write it down is so difficult. Yeah, I agree. The theory is can be quite okay. So my own personal experience, when I started college, I was used to studying in a classroom where I went to study halls afterwards, after school, to get what I wanted to get done. And then I got to university and I had to do more practical sense, but I actually lived with law students who were also going to the library a lot. So I was like, why are my class not going to the library? The theory is so important, but actually they go hand in hand. So they have to go together. So once you read the theory, you have to practice it together. So there's theory and practice together. It's really important. And then once you see some of the things that happen together, it's practice makes perfect. There's a couple of tricks along the way, like looking at the theory and data structures in different ways, but also practice is your main tool when it comes to programming. It's not the regular traditional, I'm going to read a book and be able to get to know it. It's more, okay, I type it, there's a mistake, what's the mistake? Now I look at Stack Overflow or I look at my book. There are certain things that you learn in theory that are really useful. So the null pointer exception. And also the default. So your default for reference type, including string, because that's a reference type, is always null. So when you're looking through the code, do I have my default set? Do I have why is it not picking up that I've assigned it here? Is it within a method that is already, the method call is already closed? Because when we call a method, then it's finished the variable within a method. The scope of the method the scope of the variable is gone. Thinking about that is also different. You mentioned about working with different operating systems. What is your opinion? Which operating system is the best for developing in Java? Okay, so it's actually a matter of preference. I really like Ubuntu, but now that I've started working on Windows again, I actually really like that as well. However, I'm more used to Ubuntu, but I also program in Mac as well. So it's just dependent on your own preference. I like in Linux and that kind of operating system that you can just type in and get your packages. That's quite flexible. You don't have to download stuff and wait for it and stuff like that. So Linux can be quite a nice thing to use if you want speed. Do you suggest being an expert or knowing a language well plus learning different languages? Oh, learning one language well will always be beneficial to going into learning a different language. So if you know object-oriented programming, so for instance, the fundamentals, so encapsulation, polymorphism, inheritance, all the things that make up an object-oriented programming language, then you can also use other ones. So for instance, I was looking at Python recently, and in comparison to, I'm a little bit afraid to use this word, but in comparison to using Java, Java is quite verbose in comparison to Python. However, if you were to use C, that's even longer. So it's dependent on the lines of code that you want to write to get the job done. Python, you write one line to print out something. In Java, you write a little bit longer. Things to consider, like classes or packages are groups of classes. Classes have methods. Methods are tasks. Things to think about when you are looking at your programming language. So how they're set up. So what languages to use and do. I personally, Java is my favorite one. I just got it straight away. It managed to sink in pretty easily. I also taught most of my way through college because when I got it, it was quite nice. Top tip to remember when you're asking someone within a class or whatever, or you're thinking out loud. Women tend to think out loud as well, like I do. That can be taken as, oh, you have a problem, I need to solve it, by a guy. That's happened to me a few times in work, and I'm like, no, I'm actually fine. But again, that's just a different communication style. Initiated a course on Hacker a few years ago for Java. That was really, yeah. Do you think in a specific language rather than different, rather than transfer styles, do you think you have to think in yeah, I think you do have to think about specific styles as well. But I think when I work on Java, then I think in other languages as well when it comes to it. Why should it be important for girls and women to learn code and to start a career? Okay. Oh, hello, Jose. It's really important. I think it's to do with culture as well. So we have only a limited amount of men in the workplace. I think there's a couple of things that happen within technology, and that is the people aren't toxic, but the behaviors are, and what they get away with. So if they're disrespectful to women, don't be part of the boys club. That was in some of the presentations yesterday. But it's quite tricky and a fine line to do as well. So if you say something like, don't joke about this, it's yeah, then you can kind of exclude yourself, but at the same time, it's not acceptable behavior in certain workplaces. But you can always find a great workplace to work in as well. And when you have a balanced men and women, then it becomes really a great way to problem solve. There's more cooperation, there's more communication. It's basically overall way better to work in, and you get more things done actually. So coming from different points of view, you also include more society. So when you're building an app or you're building something, you have to get into who your target audience is, and a lot of that, it comes from understanding and knowing who's who as well. And if you have people already on your team, then they will bring a different perspective, at different genders as well, obviously. And why should girls and women have more presence in the game development industry? Game development. So in the game development industry, I also did some game development, and it seems that there are a lot of, I would say when I play a game, I'm not represented. And usually you can actually feel bad looking at some of the female characters, because some of them are just unrealistic completely, and some of the male ones as well. And that's also a problem, because that's also creating more issues for physicality with it, but that's another story. When it comes to a more balanced, more realistic, but also what we were influenced by what we see and what we hear and what everything. When people are growing up, they're influenced of how they behave, and if they're already looking at and playing games that are negative towards women or put them at a lower status, then of course it's going to impact society in general when it like influences everything as well. So when we have more of a balance, it's obviously better. We have like the Romeros are great for balancing that as well. And I've met them in person, and they're very good at focusing on what needs to be focused on as well within gender and society, and that when it comes to bringing things to the forefront. And I've gone to some workshops with that. If you have any other questions before I finish, I think that's the end of the talk.